I have a million questions, but maybe we start on foreign policy. And the U.S. China, we had two stark warnings from Hank Paulson and Henry Kissinger saying relations need to go back on track, otherwise we will be headed towards a disaster. How would you characterize U.S. China foreign relations right now?
Essentially, I agree with them. I think it's really important that even though there are going to be areas of confrontation with China, areas of competition with China, you've got to reserve some space for cooperation. Look, if you're trying to deal with climate change or COVID or stabilizing the global economy, you can't do it without a relationship with China. So I welcome very much the Biden-Xi Jinping summit. I think the Americans are actually coming to the right type of policy posture towards China. None of that means that there's not going to still be some pretty fierce action on both sides, and there are all sorts of risks and dangers with this relationship, but it remains the key to 21st century stability.
But what is this about? Is it overall supremacy of who has the best, biggest economy, for example, with AI, or is it just confrontational on unlimited things?
Here's the problem. No one quite knows what China really wants to achieve. Now, some people say they want to achieve supremacy. Other people say, though, they simply want to develop. We can't be sure of that. And there's no doubt at all that in the last few years, China has moved to the reassertion of Communist Party power inside China and a much more externally aggressive, assertive position. So how do we deal with this when that obviously causes us anxiety, and we have to be prepared for that? At the same time, we need to work with China on these other issues. So my view is you need engagement and strength in equal qualities. In other words, you need to build your own strength. We've got to be strong enough in the West. This is why the American-Europe relationship is also important. We have to be strong enough to do whatever is necessary, but we need to engage. We need to engage to understand, to be able to work with China, and to ensure that the relationship isn't subject to mistakes that are accidental, and rather than situations of confrontation which may be deliberate.
Do you worry about something escalating with Taiwan that maybe is not voluntary?
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's a big anxiety, and I think it's important that we understand what China's position is in relation to Taiwan, how deep this one China policy is, but they have to understand that Taiwan is not the same as Hong Kong, and there are very strong views on this in the West.
So what role should Europe play? Should they square with the U.S. in putting pressure on China on this point, or is it right to remain more neutral?
Europe, in my view, should not be kind of navigating between America and China as if, for us, in terms of values and interests, it's an equal relationship. It's not. America is our ally. The transatlantic alliance is important. We need to keep it strong. So I think, provided America also recognizes Europe's got interests in respect to China, and Europe needs to be part of the conversation. We can't just have an American position put down on the table and we're expected to support it. Provided America is sensitive to our concerns, I think that the majority of people in Europe know we've got to be alongside America.
Yeah. Do you think America is sensitive to Europe's concerns right now?
I think we've had some difficult issues. But I think obviously around Afghanistan, the AUKUS arrangements and so on. However, having said that, I think there's a very strong commitment by the Biden administration to make sure this Europe relationship stays strong.
What can the West do together now to deal with Afghanistan in a much better way that we've seen so far?
I think the most important thing is that we try and come together with a clear and joint position. But it's immensely difficult because the country is at risk of disintegration.
And we're also looking at the winter months. I mean, is there someone that is taking leadership on Afghanistan that you would look to and say, like, we just need to follow their lead?
We're going to have to work through the international institutions because we've obviously lost our own position there. But I think it's very, very important that we do this and do this in an intelligent way that makes sense of the reality of the situation, which is you've got the Taliban government there. But my biggest concern in Afghanistan is for the fate of the people.
Yeah. Do you think it was a wake-up call for allies of the U.S. of how they could be treated
I just think it
in the future?
emphasizes yet again that in the end the world needs a strong West. And I know that the mood in Western politics has gone against, Western power and intervention and so on. I understand all of that. But it's important we don't go from one end of the spectrum completely to the other, and we recognize that the world wants and expects the West to play a strong role, and it needs it because, wherever I go in the world, my institute works in 30 different countries, helping governments change and reform. America is still highly respected. European values are still highly respected. So we need sometimes to have a little more confidence in ourselves and in our own system.
I know you've done also a lot of work on vaccines. Has the West actually let down a lot of the emerging markets with COVAX and just not getting enough access and vaccines to places that need it most?
Yeah, it's been a big problem, and obviously the problems that India's had with the Serum Institute, which was going to produce a lot of the vaccines for COVAX. But I think vaccines will now flow. There's going to be, I think, end of this year, first quarter of next year, there'll be a lot of vaccine. We need to make sure that countries can then absorb that vaccine. And then in the long term, my institute's done a lot of work on what the world needs to do globally to make sure we're much better prepared for future pandemics, and where developing countries have also got the capacity to manufacture their own vaccine, where they're in a far better state of preparation to deal with the problems of medical science today and the challenges, and also the opportunities, because this mRNA technology will also offer us the opportunity to have vaccines for many different conditions across the world. So we'll need to develop adult vaccination programs. And critical for that will be to have the right data systems in place so that we can learn more and therefore accelerate the developments of science.
Mr. Blair, talk to me about the UK a little bit. So the government is basically saying that the Northern Ireland Protocol, as is, puts the peace process at risk. Is that right? How do you see this playing, and what should Labour do in this kind of environment?
Yes, Northern Ireland is a huge problem because, as some of us try to point out at the time, if you take the United Kingdom as a whole out of the single market and customs union, in other words, you leave the economic structures of Europe, not just the political structures, then the natural consequence is that the border between North and South in Ireland becomes the external border of the EU, and therefore out of the single market and out of customs union, it means friction at that border. And it's always been a principle of the Good Friday Agreement that my government negotiated, that you keep that border open, and it's very important for peace that you do.
But they signed it.
They signed it, and now they want out of it. Now, I think there are ways through it. My institute will publish a paper in the next couple of days setting out a series of practical steps that we believe could resolve this issue. But yes, it's a big problem, and the UK government's got to be very, very careful on how it handles it.